It's a new day in the shop, and I did address this wheel issue a bit. Wow, look at that. And we're not going to talk about how we accomplished that, but you know, sometimes you got to let your inner hack out, and these drums are shot anyway, so now they'll actually get us by in the interim until we can get them replaced. So I think we've put it off long enough. It's time to jack the front end up. We're going to set it down on some dollies under the front tires so that way we can keep the whole chassis mobile. And then we're going to move over to the engine over here, separate this transmission off it. Hopefully we can do so without knocking the engine over. That would be good. Then what we're going to try to do is spin the engine hoist around a little bit, grab this kind of crooked and spin the engine around the other way with the chains and set it in the car. Yes, so hang tight. We're going to make some more forward progress. Now, one thing that we're going to want to do before we get the engine and transmission in this thing, or anything else for that matter, is straighten out this bracket, because this is where the battery goes. And we're going to want to do this carefully so we don't break it. So we should probably press this down. And what I like to use here is this variable angle swing press. They work great for these applications. Beautiful. It's good as new. Alright guys, so now that we got that motor mount swapped out with one that has a little bit more appropriate patina on it, we got to take a little bit of pause before we set this thing down in here, because how these motor mounts are set up to behave is they're designed to isolate the engine completely from this front cross member. That way the frame can flex underneath the engine. So some of these, if you buy a kit, there's a rubber isolator that goes under this post. There's another one on the other side over here and under here. Originally, some of these had a spring under each one of these two posts here, and the engine weight would actually sit on the springs. And then there was a leather isolator that would go right here, and then a washer and another spring down underneath, and this would kind of float above the cross member. So we don't have any of that, nor are we going to go to Max or wherever else and buy, you know, new reproduction stuff for this. That's just crazy for this type of project. So this is where you get a little creative and you go to your Horde. So I, for whatever reason, hoard springs like crazy. So I'm thinking we got some beefy boys in here. These are, oh, yeah, these are wicked stiff. So I'm going to grab two of them. We'll set these out here. And then, let's see here. Looks like this one here, that might be good for the motor mount post. So we'll just kind of set that guy over there. And then I've got some strips of rubber here that I ripped off one of the pallets that I was using for firewood. Remember that from over the winter? So I'm going to take one of these strips of rubber, I'm going to grab a hole saw, and I'm going to pop a rubber bushing, isolator, whatever you want to call it, out of this slab of rubber. And then we'll capture that bushing with a couple of washers, and we'll put that underneath the center of the motor mount. We'll put these two springs under each of those posts, and we'll put this spring on the bottom with two washers to isolate that. And perhaps we should be good to go without a dime spent. That's 3 points for the hoarders, just in case anybody's keeping track. Alright guys, now that we're mostly set up here, I can show you exactly what we got going on. So one spring is going to go here, the other spring is going to go there. Then there's supposed to be a bushing in the center, so we're making our own bushing. So basically, I've taken this washer and opened it up to accept the 7/16 stud that's on this motor mount here, right here. And this is going to set down in the frame rail, right here, or the cross member. Look at that perfect fit, I tell you what. Then we've got two washers that are going to serve to capture this in the frame. So one will set over the top. Our isolator will go right here. And then this one will come up from the bottom. And then when that's up from the bottom, the spring will go up against that washer over the stud, and then the nut will go up against the spring. That way, nothing is tightened down firm. The engine will rock on these two springs and float over this center bushing. It should work out pretty slick. Again, not a dime spent. 2 points for the hoarders. I'm sorry, 3. Well guys, there it is. The motor is officially sitting in it. So I'll get you in here to show you that front motor mount and how that's set up. You can see our isolator down in there, and the springs in place, and then the lower spring and that bushing captured by the two washers. So pretty decent. I think that'll work just fine. Now hopefully we don't have to pull this out again. So hopefully it runs. Hopefully it doesn't knock or smoke. Hopefully we can repair this huge crack that's in the side of the water jacket on top of that other crack that's already been repaired. And well, hopefully we don't have to pull it out again to fit a transmission in here. Lots of hopes. There's an expression about that, but we can't say it on YouTube. You know what it is. Well, I think that's enough for one night. Moving forward, we're going to try to see what we can do to fire this engine up.
The next day.
Oh guys, you can tell it's springtime in the Northeast. Everybody's out there just farming like crazy. Yeehaw! Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Straight pipes, just like God intended. Man, this thing looks good with the engine sitting in it. Well, now that we got the engine in it, we're gonna have to start figuring out some battery cables here. Now that we got the battery bracket tray doohickey nice and precision flat. So I happen to have a pile of spare battery cables here because I never throw anything out. But we should probably go grab a 6-volt battery just to make sure that we select the right length of cable so we don't have a big loop hanging down or end up having it not long enough. That'd be a terrible problem to have. So we'll go grab the battery and set that down in there. All right, now we got a battery in there. So the way these 6-volt batteries are oriented, we actually could put this in here either way. And we could have the positive be where the negative is and the negative where the positive is. So it gives us a little bit of versatility here. I'm not entirely sure that that's where I want the positive, but let's see what we got for cables and play around with it. All right, so I got this one cable kind of mocked in here. And it's a little bit on the long side, but it reaches where the negative is quite nicely. And I have this other one that was being used as a negative, and it reaches what is now the positive terminal and this hole in the frame quite nicely. So we had a 50-50 chance, and you know, I always get 50-50 chances wrong. So I think I'm going to pull this battery out, spin it 180 and drop it back in and put the positive over here.
You sure about that?
Well, I guess we should check to see if this thing is seized. Nope. We're off to a smashing start. All right, guys, big moment here. Will it crank? Oh, well, that was anticlimactic. All right, now we got to figure out what's going on.
Few moments later.
All right, guys, so what I've done here temporarily, and this is just a test, is I've left the negative connected, and I've got my 12-volt jumper pack on the negative, which is grounded to the frame rail here. Then I've disconnected the positive, and I have the positive of my jumper pack hooked to this. And what I'm trying to figure out is if this is a battery voltage issue. I thought this battery was charged, but now I'm not so positive. Now, the starter motors don't care if you send 12 volts to them. It is the voltage regulator that cares, and also the coil will not last very long if you send 12 volts to it. But for what we're doing, this is perfectly fine because we have the starter motor isolated. So we're gonna give this a try and see if it cranks. And if it cranks, I'll have to put a charger on this battery and see if I can bring it back. Still nothing. All right, so we got to figure out what's going on here.
Few moments later.
All right, so now what I've done, and it's going to be kind of hard for you to see, but I've moved the ground over here. So I've got the ground hooked right on the top of the starter motor, right here. Now we're going to see if it's a grounding issue from the engine block to the frame, because if we don't have a good ground from the block to the frame, you don't have a circuit. So now that we've got this isolated, let's give this a try. Success. So what we're going to have to do is run a ground strap from the engine block to the frame rail, because we obviously have insufficient ground coming through here, probably because it's rusty.
You sure about that?
All right, so now that we've verified that it cranks and all is well with the world, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that I am in fact an idiot. So these motor mounts on the frame are actually isolated with rubber on both sides. So when we ground it to the frame right here, the engine block is entirely isolated from the frame. So of course we don't have a circuit. So this is easy peasy. We'll just have to address this and run a permanent ground somewhere else. Wow, look at all the crap that it blew out of the exhaust.
Squirrel!
All right, we've run a new temporary ground to the transmission bolt, And no, this is not a permanent temporary YouTube ground. This is temporary ground because we're not going very far without a transmission. So this is a temporary ground. But now we've got it grounded the way that it should be. So we're going to try it again and see if it cranks over with its own circuit and its own 6-volt battery. Yep, that sounds like a 6-volt system to me. All right, moving forward.
The next day.
All right, guys, so now that this thing cranks, the next phase for this is checking for spark. And so I've gone ahead and rearranged the cabling on this because this is supposed to be set up as a positive ground. So I put a different set of cables on here, and we've got a clip here that's attaching the coil wire to the negative on the battery, which is backwards because it's positive ground. Positive grounds really mess with my head. I don't know why, but they do. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to pop all the spark plugs out and lay them up in the corners of the plug holes and crank this thing over and see if we got spark. All right, guys, so we'll slam this positive back on here. And you guys can keep an eye on those spark plugs and tell me if I got spark. Not looking good from where I'm at, so now we got to figure out what's going on here. We're going to go ahead and pop the cover off and have a look at the points. And scrape the points and see if that takes care of our problem. These points are looking pretty scuzzy, so oh yeah, getting lots of junk off of there. That may very well be the culprit. Alright, now that we got those scraped, let's put power back to it and see if we got anything. Still not looking good. Alright, back to the drawing board. Alright guys, so we're going ahead and putting a new set of points in this thing, and this does have the Nurex updated distributor plate in it, so it has modern Ford points in it. And there's just, I wasn't going to film this, but there's a couple things that I think are worthy of pointing out in this, no pun intended. So this particular setup has a, I'm guessing that's a brass contactor that goes from your points post down to the base plate, and the previous owner had this all the way out here and it was touching the case of the distributor, which you don't want. So when you put this contactor on, make sure that you take both of the nuts off of your points post and put that brass contactor all the way up flush against your spring for your set of points. And the other thing to take note of here is that with these points in place, you can see that I'm on the lobe, but that's as far in as they'll go, and the points are not separating. And that is because there's an interference on the case right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grind a little flat across the edge of the points frame right here to give us that little bit of adjustment that we need to set the points. Before I pull them out, I've gone ahead and marked the edge of the points body with a Sharpie so I can see exactly where I want to grind to gain the clearance that I need to get the points adjusted. And now we have our points body clearanced, and now you can see that we can get the full adjustment out of these points. Alright guys, so now that we got this all bolted in place, I've opened up the points gap to nothing in particular, just open, and I checked for continuity between this post and the ignition wire, and I did not have it, but I did have continuity at the base plate down below, which told me that this little foot wasn't touching the base plate. So just something to be aware of. I pulled the foot off, and just gave it a little bend until I had contact on that base plate and showed continuity between that ignition wire and the base plate. So before we go ahead and set the points gap to 16 to 20 thousandths, being that there was some things that were weird on this, we're going to go ahead and just kind of verify that the timing is correct. So to do that, we're going to pop this timing pin out of here, and we're going to rotate the engine until it drops in the dimple, and that's going to put number 1 at top dead center. And then at that point, if our distributor rotor is pointing at the number 1 contact with the, well, I can't use the lever on the dash, but with the timing all the way retarded, then we are at the correct spot. Alright, so this looks great. Now that we've verified that we are timed correctly, this has naturally put us on the points closed position because we want to be firing here. So now we're going to stick the hand crank back in, and we're going to rotate the engine a little bit more until the lobe opens the points up and we're on the center of the lobe. Then we will set the points gap to 16 to 20 thousandths of an inch. Well guys, after a whole lot of trial and tribulation and new points and condenser and some other work, I think we got this sorted out. So let's give this a final try. We got spark. Hallelujah. Well, now that we got spark, there's something else that's missing. Guess we need a carburetor. So I ran up to the shop, the big shop, the farm, and went through my carburetor stash and grabbed a box full of carbs. I don't have a hoarding problem. I don't want to hear about it. But, you know, this one looks pretty. And, you know, our lives have been difficult enough. Rather than make our lives more difficult needlessly, let's just try the pretty one for now and see if that works for us. No, we're not going to just slap it on blindly. I do see a little gunk in there, so we'll pop it apart quick.
You sure about that?
And give it a quick once over, then we'll slap it on. Well guys, it goes to show you that just because things are pretty doesn't mean anything. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to get you in here, but you can't really see it. If I can turn my, let's just throw the carb around. This carb has gotten wet, and I can't get it apart because the top half is rusted to the bottom half. There's actually a really tight clearance on a bore that comes down from the top half into the bottom, and I don't want to break it trying to get it apart. So being that there's grunge in there and there's clear evidence of rust in there, I did spray it with some PB Blaster to try to get it apart, but I guess this one's out. And this one that looks pretty crusty actually came apart real easy. I put it back together again, but this was just a test to see, and it doesn't really look all that bad. So, oops, that was the drain plug. This is what happens when you try to do two things at once. Can't walk or chew gum at the same time. But yeah, this one doesn't look too terrible. So, everything looks good. Needle and seat are free. So I think we will clean this one up a little bit, make sure everything's copacetic, make sure all the passages are clear, and send it.
It's gonna be a good day. It's gonna send it.
The only thing we're missing is the lever for the choke arm. So we'll probably rob that off one of the other 13 that are floating around here. All right, guys. Well, we've got this carburetor just about totally gone through here. Everything's mostly cleaned up. I gotta clean that jet up yet. But no project of things that are 100 years old is without its setbacks. And if you look, this jet tube is split, and it's actually split down both sides, about right in the middle. Would you focus? Come on. Come on, it focused the first time. It's going to fight me on this one. You're going to have to take my word for it. There's a split similar to that on both sides. So I went through every carb I have here that I'm willing to cannibalize for parts, to be fair. And they're all split. So this appears to be a systemic problem with these things. So I've got an idea. Is it going to work? I don't know. But I don't have any other options at this point. So I'm going to press this piece of fuel hose on here, and it's a nice tight fit. I'm going to push it all the way up to the top, and we're going to put it together, see what happens. All right, now that we have our little condom installed on the fuel pickup here, we're going to put this back together and hope for the best. You know, sometimes you got to just improvise, think outside the box, make things work. It just has to seal. The only other thing I could have done was smear it with JB Weld, and who knows, that might happen in the future. More cardboard gaskets, because I don't have one. Boom, gasket. Looks factory, right? That's right. Improvise, adapt, overcome. Thin layer of grease on our gasket surfaces before we assemble the carb. Boom, carburetor. Look at that. Let's go slap it on the engine. Well, guys, we've made some pretty good progress today. It's after midnight. Looks good with the carburetor on there. Man, almost complete. However, I've been stopped dead in my tracks because I do not have anything to put a fitting in there to run a temporary fuel line to. So we're going to have to go to the hardware store tomorrow. And obviously not happening tonight at this hour. That being said, we've put an awful lot of work into this today. And I think we've earned the right to fire it off a can of laughing gas just to hear it bark off. So let's give that a try. Sometimes you gotta know when to quit.
The next day.
Alright guys, well, it's a new day. Sun's out. You can see the Fummins out there in its majestic glory. And I think it's time to get a fresh look at this and try to figure out why it's not firing off ether, because it certainly should. So we're going to pull the carb back off it and see if perhaps the intake or exhaust manifold is plugged with any means, given the junk that's falling out on the floor from the exhaust manifold. So let's take a look at this. Alright, we got the carb off. I hooked the vacuum up to the exhaust manifold, cranked the engine over with the plugs out of it, and we got everything all hooked back up again. Got spark plugs back out. We're going to crank it by hand. You can see we still got good hot spark. So, I'm a little baffled as to why we wouldn't have ignition. So, let's give this another try.
Few moments later.
Alright guys, well, we've got a cattywampus temporary fuel system here, and we got the carb back in place. No idea what's going to happen. Don't know if the carb bowl is going to overflow. Don't know if it's going to start. No idea. But we're going to capture it for posterity, whatever it is. Give it a little bit of throttle here. Battery up. Give it a little whiff for good measure. See what happens. She's a runner. Well, guys, I would declare that a huge success. Doesn't sound too bad. Didn't seem to be blowing a ton of smoke or anything like that. Nothing on the floor. Nice. Nothing on the ceiling either, like the H. That was fun. But I think we're gonna call it for this video. We're gonna take our successes where we can get them, and we're gonna quit while we're ahead for today. Next is gonna be trying to figure out what the heck we're gonna do with that transmission that is rusted solid. I really don't want to cannibalize that other transmission because it's really nice. So we're gonna have to get creative with that. But this is a huge, huge step forward. Appreciate you guys being there with me for it. Stay tuned. More coming on this Doodlebug resurrection. Thanks for watching. Keep saving the old iron.